We just need to confirm your address, sir.
It's on my license right here. Is everything all right?
Just stand still for me.
An ICE agent thought he was acting on a routine anonymous tip, the kind that comes in confident, vague, and just urgent enough to justify action. In his mind, it would be simple. A quick stop, a short detention, verification later, then move on. That agent was Reed Malloy, late that afternoon, in a supermarket parking lot in Arlington, Virginia. Malloy gathered his team and treated the tip like a green light instead of what it actually was. A prompt to verify carefully. He didn't slow the moment down. He didn't question the gaps. He assumed the conclusion before checking the facts. The parking lot looked ordinary. Shoppers pushed carts between rows of cars. Engines idled. Nothing about the scene suggested danger, flight, or urgency. There was no suspect behavior, no attempt to hide. Judge Malcolm Reeves was loading groceries into his car. A black man in plain clothes, focused on finishing a normal day. He wasn't running. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't doing anything that drew attention. Malloy's team approached with purpose and tight spacing, the kind of posture that says the decision has already been made. Connor Vance moved to one side. Lucas Boone stayed close to procedure. Maya Sterling followed the lead. All of them wore body cameras. From the first step forward, this wasn't a question. It was a detention looking for a reason. What Malloy didn't know was that the man he was about to detain was a federal judge. And more importantly, that every decision he made from this moment forward would be recorded, preserved, and later examined frame by frame. The mistake wasn't what he did next. The mistake was believing he already knew how this would end. Reed Malloy initiated contact without explanation that matched the situation. A few short questions. A few controlled commands. The kind designed to establish dominance, not clarity. Judge Reeves did not resist. He did not argue tone with tone. He listened, answered calmly, and did the one thing that should have ended the encounter immediately. He identified himself and produced valid identification. This was the moment everything should have slowed down. The pause point. The routine verification step that exists for exactly this reason. A radio call. A name check. Minutes at most. That pause never came. Malloy glanced at the ID and treated it like an inconvenience. Not proof. Not resolution. He made the choice that locked the entire encounter into the wrong direction. Detain first. Verify later. Reeves stayed composed. His voice remained level. His answers were consistent. He made it clear he was willing to cooperate and that standard channels could confirm his identity quickly. Malloy ignored that offer. Instead, he used speed and pressure. He spoke faster. He tightened control. He acted like urgency itself was justification. Connor Vance closed distance, positioning himself to limit movement. Lucas Boone focused on commands and procedural steps, keeping the process moving forward without stopping to question why. Maya Sterling saw the identification and hesitated for a moment, but she did not override the leader. Inside a chain of command, hesitation without action becomes agreement. The body cameras captured everything. The ID being presented, the refusal to slow down. The moment a simple stop crossed into an unnecessary detention, Reeves understood what was happening. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't give them an excuse. He repeated the facts and stayed steady, knowing the record mattered more than the moment. Because once detention replaces verification, every second after that becomes harder to defend. This wasn't chaos. It was controlled escalation. Reed Malloy treated compliance like surrender. Every calm response from Reeves was met with more pressure, not less. The goal was no longer clarity. It was momentum. Reeves requested a phone call. It should have been routine. A basic safeguard. A way to resolve uncertainty quickly. The request was delayed. Not because verification was difficult, but because control was the priority. Time became a tool. Every second without a call increased Malloy's leverage and reduced Reeves's ability to break the direction the stop was moving in. Connor Vance stayed close. Narrowing space. His positioning sent a clear signal. This was not a conversation anymore. Lucas Boone continued issuing procedural commands. Steps that looked neutral on the surface but ensured nothing slowed down. Maya Sterling watched the moment stretch longer than it should have. She knew the ID had been shown. She knew verification was available. But she stayed silent. That silence mattered. Reeves understood the shift. He recognized the posture, the pacing, the language. He knew the team had already committed to escalation. So he adjusted. He didn't argue about authority. He didn't protest the delay. He did what experienced people do when they realize the other side is no longer listening. He protected the record. He repeated the facts. Calmly. Clearly. He made sure the body cameras captured what he was offering and what they were refusing. People in the parking lot began to notice. A shopper slowed near the cart return. A car idled longer than it needed to. One bystander stopped completely and lifted a phone. Public space has its own form of accountability. Malloy pushed forward anyway. And in that moment, the detention crossed from questionable into indefensible, because the tools to resolve it were available, and the choice to ignore them was now visible from every angle. Eventually, routine channels were used, not because the situation escalated, not because danger appeared, but because the delay had gone on long enough that it could no longer be justified. When verification finally happened, the result came back fast and clean. Malcolm Reeves, federal judge. Identity confirmed. The shift was immediate, not because the detention suddenly became wrong, but because the person being detained now carried a status they could no longer ignore. Voices lowered. Posture changed. Movement slowed. The momentum that had driven the encounter vanished in seconds. Reeves was finally allowed access to his phone. He didn't waste the moment. The first call he made wasn't to family, colleagues, or the media. It was to Tessa Langford. He gave her what mattered. Not emotion. Time. Exact location. Names of the agents involved. And one detail that would decide whether the truth survived the next few weeks: the body cameras were running. Langford understood immediately what that meant. She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer reassurance. She treated the call like a race against deletion, overwriting, and quiet technical failures. Within the same hour, she moved. Preservation and litigation hold notices were sent directly to ICE leadership and agency counsel. Specific, immediate, non-negotiable. She demanded the original body camera files, full recordings, metadata intact, upload and doc logs included, dispatch records, tip intake notes, any facility video tied to the detention. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about freezing reality before it could be softened, summarized, or lost. Because once evidence is locked, power loses its ability to rewrite what happened. Tessa Langford didn't stop at the agency. She understood something most people learn too late. Evidence disappears fastest when everyone assumes someone else is preserving it, while her notices were landing inside ICE. She moved outward. She contacted the supermarket's management and corporate office directly, not to review footage, not to request edits, only to preserve it. Every exterior camera facing the parking lot, every angle covering the entrances. Cart returns. and traffic lanes. She specified the time window down to the minute. She knew many systems overwrote in days, not months. She also moved on witnesses immediately. Reeves had noticed at least one bystander recording. Langford asked where that person had been standing, what direction they walked, and what they looked like, before hesitation or fear could set in. Her team began reaching out through public-facing store channels and local community boards, asking anyone who recorded the detention to preserve their files. This wasn't dramatic. It was practical. Digital evidence has a short half-life when nobody locks it down. Inside ICE. The tone began to change. Reed Malloy knew enough to understand what it meant to detain someone after valid identification had been presented. He began assembling a justification narrative. He leaned on the anonymous tip. Officer discretion. Safety language. Uncertainty. But Langford's hold notice had already closed the exits. She didn't just demand video. She demanded metadata. Upload logs. Dispatch timelines. And chain of custody records. Anything that would expose later storytelling. If a file went missing now, the absence itself became evidence. And that pressure was already working. Because once truth is frozen early, explanations can't be retrofitted to match it. The case was no longer about what Malloy said happened. It was about what the record would show unaltered. While Tessa Langford was locking down evidence, Reed Malloy was trying to put the incident back into a box. He understood the danger, at least in part. Detaining someone after valid identification had been shown was already a problem. Letting that problem reach leadership without context was worse. So he started writing. His report leaned heavily on the anonymous tip. He described uncertainty. He emphasized officer discretion and safety considerations. He framed the encounter as evolving and necessary. What he didn't do was tell the simple truth. He didn't write that verification was available and refused. He didn't acknowledge that the pause point had been skipped. Instead, he committed to a narrative where detention seemed inevitable. Inside the team, the pressure tightened. Connor Vance aligned with Malloy's version, treating the situation like something they all needed to get through together. Lucas Boone retreated behind procedure, focusing on policy, language, and step-by-step actions that avoided personal responsibility. Maya Sterling became the hinge point. The footage showed she had seen the identification. It showed her hesitation, and it showed her decision not to intervene. Silence didn't erase what the cameras captured. Malloy doubled down. He submitted written statements that softened the refusal to verify and suggested Reeves had been less cooperative than the video would later prove. That decision changed everything. Because once your words don't match the record, the issue stops being judgment. It becomes credibility. And credibility failures with federal authority don't stay administrative for long. By the next morning, the incident was no longer a single event. It had split into two paths. The first moved publicly and immediately. The civil case. Judge Reeves authorized Tessa Langford to draft the complaint without delay. The structure was simple and deliberate. A vague tip led to contact. Valid identification was presented. Routine verification was available. Detention was chosen anyway. No speculation. No emotional framing. Just decision points. The second path moved quieter, but heavier. Inside ICE. Langford's preservation notice triggered internal attention that could not be ignored. Supervisors requested summaries. Agency counsel asked for timelines. Leadership wanted to know why verification had been delayed when it was clearly available. And they didn't ask Malloy what happened. They asked what the cameras showed. At the same time, pressure arrived from outside the agency. A witness clip surfaced online that evening. It didn't capture every detail, but it captured enough. A calm man being detained after presenting ID. People asked the obvious question. Why wasn't this stopped? Comments filled in with similar stories. Names were demanded. Explanations followed late. Langford kept communication tight. She confirmed only what locked the record in place. That body camera footage existed. That preservation demands were active. That the matter would proceed through formal legal channels. Public time pressure had arrived. And with it, the space to quietly manage the incident began to disappear. Once the evidence began to come in, the story stopped being negotiable. Prosecutors didn't start with opinions. They started with comparisons. Malloy's written reports were lined up against the body camera footage, frame by frame, timestamp by timestamp, metadata intact. The contrast was immediate. The video showed Reeves calmly presenting valid identification. It showed routine verification being available. It showed Malloy choosing not to use it. The report suggested uncertainty. Dispatch records removed the last layer of ambiguity. They showed exactly when verification was finally requested, and how easily it could have been done earlier. Supermarket cameras confirmed positions and timing in the parking lot. Witness phone videos captured tone and pacing, making it harder to argue that the detention was brief or routine. Nothing dramatic, nothing explosive, just clarity. And clarity is dangerous when a narrative depends on uncertainty. What turned this from a civil rights case into something heavier wasn't the detention itself. It was the gap. The space between what the camera showed and what Malloy wrote afterward. That gap doesn't get explained away. It gets investigated. Because when recorded reality and official statements diverge, the question stops being, was this a mistake? It becomes, why doesn't this match? And that question opens doors no one inside the agency can close. Once prosecutors completed the comparison, the direction of the case was set. This was no longer about a questionable stop or a bad judgment call. It was about unlawful detention followed by statements that didn't match recorded reality. That combination changes everything. Federal prosecutors treated the case like they always do when credibility is on the line. They built it on preserved evidence, not interpretations. The body camera footage was complete. The metadata showed when recording started and stopped. Upload and doc logs confirmed nothing had been altered after the preservation notice. Dispatch timelines proved verification had always been available. Tip intake records showed how thin the original justification really was. There were no missing pieces, which meant there were no excuses. Charges were filed. For Reed Malloy, the shift was immediate. Defense strategies that work in administrative reviews don't survive in criminal court. He couldn't argue policy nuance against his own camera. Inside the team, the atmosphere fractured. Connor Vance stayed close to Malloy's version. But the pressure showed. Lucas Boone leaned harder into procedural language, as if policy steps could shield him from what the footage captured. Maya Sterling became unavoidable. The recording showed her seeing the identification and watching the refusal to slow down. Not acting didn't erase her presence. This was no longer about one decision in a parking lot. It was about what happens when authority chooses momentum over truth and then tries to explain it after the fact. When the case reached court, the atmosphere changed. There were no dramatic revelations, no surprise witnesses, no emotional testimony designed to sway the room. There didn't need to be. The prosecution played the video, frame by frame. The jury watched Judge Reeves present valid identification. They watched routine verification being ignored. They watched detention replace a pause that never happened. Then they read Malloy's reports. The contrast didn't require explanation. Metadata confirmed the recordings were complete. Upload logs showed they hadn't been altered. Dispatch records placed verification within reach the entire time. The defense argued discretion, uncertainty, officer safety. But discretion collapses when verification is refused. And uncertainty disappears when evidence is preserved intact. Malloy couldn't talk his way around the footage. His own camera became the most reliable witness in the room. By the time closing arguments ended, the outcome was no longer in doubt. The jury returned a guilty verdict. Sentencing followed. Reed Malloy was ordered to serve years in federal prison, not for making a mistake but for doubling down on it. Because authority doesn't fail when it pauses to verify. It fails when it insists on being right after being proven wrong. The prison sentence didn't close the story. It expanded it. While the criminal case ended with a conviction, the civil case continued on its own track. Judge Reeves's lawsuit moved forward, not to punish an individual, but to confront a system. The argument was clear. This detention didn't become wrong when agents learned who Reeves was. It was wrong the moment valid identification was shown and verification was refused. That distinction mattered. Because civil rights don't activate based on status. They exist before names, titles, or authority enter the picture. Inside ICE, the fallout spread. Policies were reviewed. Training protocols were questioned. Supervisors were forced to explain why a simple identity check hadn't happened immediately. Connor Vance, Maya Sterling, and Lucas Boone didn't face prison. But the footage followed them. Their decisions were documented, reviewed, and tied to failures that leadership could no longer ignore. Silence had a cost. So did following momentum instead of judgment. For Reeves, the outcome wasn't just compensation or closure. It was something rarer. A complete record, preserved truth, proven contradictions, and, for everyone watching, the lesson landed quietly, but clearly. This case wasn't won by outrage. It wasn't won by status. It was won by preparation and receipts. If Tessa Langford hadn't acted in that first hour, this story would have ended very differently. The footage might have been trimmed. The logs might have been overwritten. The memory of the moment would have softened with time. And what should have been accountability could have dissolved into a quiet internal review. Judge Reeves didn't win because of who he was. He won because he stayed calm, protected the record, and called the right person before the truth had a chance to disappear. This case is a reminder of something simple but uncomfortable. Verification is not optional when rights are on the line. Authority doesn't become legitimate by moving faster. It becomes legitimate by slowing down and checking itself. Most people never get a second chance to prove what really happened. That's why the first hour matters. That's why documentation matters. And that's why receipts matter more than power plays. If you were in Reeves's position, would you have known what to document, who to call, what to preserve? And if you've ever seen authority rush past the truth, share your story in the comments. If you want more stories where calm preparation outlasts intimidation, hit like, subscribe, and stay with us. Because when the record is clean, the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to survive.